So I walked into the room and I was the only person there. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another digital download. It's Friday. It's 2:00. Well, it's 2:00 somewhere in the world, and it's the digital download again. The digital download, which is Rob,
the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live.
Indeed. And we have such fun with this, don't we? So we were going to have a guest this week, but unfortunately the guest has had an emergency and they're not able to come, which means that you've got us, which is a win or a lose, depending on your frame of reference. But it gives us an opportunity to talk about some things that we've seen this week, some things that we've learned this week, what's delighting us and horrifying us over the course of the last 7 days. And has anybody had any pivotal things that they found, anything that they've seen in the news that they've thought, wow, well, that certainly challenges my thinking? Or has anyone had that light bulb moment about something where they've just thought, I've been doing it wrong all this time, and now all of a sudden I see the light. Hi. Oh, I think Mohammed might be on the wrong live stream. He's looking to inspiring people. Welcome, lovely to have you here, and hello to Robert as well.
Hi, Robert.
Let's make it all about Jensen. That's a good idea. That's a good idea. So Jensen.
So what's your favourite crisps, Jensen?
Oh.
Well, I don't eat crisps, so yeah, a bit of a.
So what's your favourite
odd
protein?
One there. Protein. Well, my favourite protein. It depends. It depends how much money you would like to spend. Kind of high end, you're going for chicken. Protein shakes. But yeah, chicken best protein meat wise. Yeah. What about yourself?
Fillet steak.
I was gonna say I'm more of a pork fan myself.
Okay.
Because I'm sure this is what everybody tuned in to hear today.
Yeah.
We as Robert said, we're going to make it all about Jensen. So protein, chicken.
Protein. I mean, unless they bring out protein crisps, then I may be swayed. But until the day happens, crisps are a no-go for me.
What about chocolate? Did you know dark chocolate? Well, certainly this bar anyway has 9.5 grams of protein in it.
Wow! So all of a sudden, chocolate has become a health food.
John Bloomfield says dairy milk for the win.
Dairy milk for the win. Yes. Yeah. In fact, oddly, you know the old joke about how do you know when somebody's a vegan? And the answer is because they'll tell you. And I recently gave up veganism. I took it up a couple of years ago because my son decided he was going to be a vegan, and I wanted to try to be a supportive dad. And to be honest with you, it was the most grim 2 years of my entire life. So now my son has come back. In fact, Tim, I mean, you've got to love Tim. We went and delivered a talk for an organisation in London. And Tim said, should we go out and get a spot of lunch? And I said, well, and he said, that's fine. We'll go somewhere vegan. So Tim decided he was going to eat vegan food with me in this particular restaurant that wasn't a vegan restaurant. And it was grim. And not once did he turn up his nose at it and say, this is inedible, I'm going to get a steak. So, but it is a fairly horrible existence being a vegan. So I'm thrilled.
That lunch was the worst 2 years of his life, too.
I think you could be right.
Zachary Carter, who's often tunes in, says there are protein crisps.
Oh.
Okay. Wow.
Zachary, if you can find them or post them or something in there, that would be ace.
I thought my wife and my son did that once. They made potato chip type out of pressed chicken.
Ooh.
Oh, and do you air dry the chicken or?
Well, we have an air fryer, but beyond that, don't ask me. It wasn't dipped in grease, and I don't know.
Yeah, I think that probably chicken is best cooked, isn't it? rather than air cured or something like that. Anyway, we were going to do a bit of content sharing this week.
Oh, I love pork scratchings.
Yeah. Now that's a proper health food. That is. Yeah, we're going to do some content sharing, and I'm actually quite keen to share my piece of content.
You're going first.
Yeah, why not? Why not? And the reason that I wanted to share my piece of content first is that I think it might be a bit of a discussion piece. And so this particular one, let me just prep it.
So Zachary's come up. He said it's on My Protein. Do you use My Protein, Jensen? Because there's loads of, they do like protein biscuits and stuff on My Protein.
I know of them.
I'm showing too much knowledge here, aren't I?
Yeah, you're a lot of knowledge. Yeah.
So this was a piece of content that I wanted to share. Now, for those of you, I mean, everyone in the UK knows who Stephen Bartlett is. For those of you further afield, maybe you don't know who Stephen Bartlett is. He's a 30-year-old, charismatic, charming, hugely successful businessman. He started a company called Social Chain, which was like a social media marketing agency. And he sold that, having pocketed the best part of £100 million. He now resides a lot of his time on Dragon's Den.
Which is Shark Tank for people in the US.
Yeah, thank you. And he's an interesting chap because he sort of polarizes opinion. People generally are not ambivalent or centre about him. They either love him or hate him. Some people find him intensely annoying. I actually am a bit of a fan of his, although he has developed a nasty habit recently of talking about things he's not qualified to talk about. So business, yes, he's a fantastic podcast host, and he does these video podcasts, and he's had all sorts of people on. He's had Richard Branson on, he's had Jimmy Carr on, he's had Ramesh Ranganathan on. He's had a whole list of people who are Richard Hammond from Top Gear and the Grand Tour. And he's brilliant at getting them to talk about who they are, where they've been, what their drivers are. Very relaxed way of talking to these people. But he is increasingly sharing stuff like this. Stuff which he's not qualified to talk about. He talks about relationships. He talks about how you shouldn't be in a relationship if you can't yet love yourself. Now, here's a guy that's not had a long-term relationship, and he's handing out relationship advice. Here, he's talking about the importance of being vulnerable. And I don't think he means vulnerable. I think what he means is authentic, which is obviously the case. But the problem with setting this up as an expectation of people is that some people are really uncomfortable of going into this space.
Thanks, Alfie Day.
Thank you.
Love Chinese digital download. Thank you.
This is a real problem area, and I think all of us do share some vulnerability sometimes. We've had a bereavement, we've had an illness, we've had something which is wonderful that's happened, or something that's dreadful that's happened, and we're quite happy sharing that with our audience. But increasingly in my news feed, I'm seeing more and more people who are just sharing their vulnerabilities, how life is bad, how this has happened, and a catalogue of tragedies that have happened to them. And my concern with this is the broader concern, not just about Stephen Bartlett, because he's the tip of the iceberg here, but the idea that when we go into our social spaces, what we're looking for is advice from people who know better than us. And it's kind of like that, say, the Latin saying, caveat emptor, buyer beware. The best barometer for whether somebody is qualified to give you advice is A, are they living by this advice themselves? If you're talking to a business coach, they shouldn't have holes in their shoes. They shouldn't be turning up on a rusty bicycle. They should be turning up in a Ferrari because they're supposed to be the epitome of success. So are they walking the walk? And are they able to articulate that to you and demonstrate that they're doing the things that they're trying to coach you on? And I think that increasingly we are in a space where people are purporting to be experts about things, and in fact, they're not.
I'm not sure I agree entirely, Adam. I think let me give you an example of where I felt incredibly vulnerable. And I don't know if Stephen Bartlett is trying to do this or not, but
he tunes in, Alex. So
okay,
We'll see a comment in a moment from him, I'm sure.
yeah, it'll come up in the chat.
Yeah, I remember
It
doing.
takes a little while to come through.
Yeah, I remember doing some training years ago, and we were being asked to share some of our most vulnerable moments, but it was in the context of building rapport and building relationships with others, also going through the same training, which was somewhat challenging. You know, and I remember sharing. While I was nervous, I first asked. I think I asked my boss or my colleague at the time. I asked someone, "Do you think I should share this?" And they said, "Yeah." And you know, back in 2005, I lost my job for poor performance, and working in sales, that's a pretty bad thing, something you don't want to share with people. But when I shared it, it kind of took a big weight off my shoulders. But B, I really connected with people because there were others that had experienced similar things, and it meant that, you know, I experienced a dynamic of relationship that I hadn't experienced before with those people.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that that a singular instance is quite the same thing as that becoming your normal mode of posting.
Right, of course, yeah.
So you know what we're buying into with you as an individual is this whole host of skills, experience, personality traits, honesty, kindness, all of those things, and this is one tiny little dot in this enormously long journey of skills. And whilst, you know, that's as good a metaphor as any, whilst you share that and you say this was a dreadful thing to have done and it was a real wake-up call for me, and I can empathize with that, and I can say, yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that, Alex. You know, like if every time you open your mouth it's yet another catastrophe,
Yeah.
the problem is that sets an expectation that you're somebody around whom catastrophe huddles. Yeah. And that's not healthy, whether or not you're on the same team as me, or I'm thinking of hiring you, or even if you're going to become a client of mine. Yeah, you know, 100%. It sounds like a recipe for disaster to me.
Well, and I have many thoughts on the subject of vulnerability, because I'm with you, Adam, in that being vulnerable is like one perspective of the human experience. So if we're actually, what attracts people to people is authenticity, we're not in a state of vulnerability 100% of the time. So then to try to be in a state of vulnerability 100% of the time is actually inauthentic, because it's not aligned with the human experience. So it's actually not possible to be vulnerable 100% of the time. And then if you are, then you're not. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's not real then. I remember having a conversation a while ago with a friend who actually is a vulnerability coach. And he goes in and he coaches leaders how to be more vulnerable. And I think that is something that is helpful, because if you also don't have vulnerability as part of the human experience, then you're not being fully authentic as well. So incorporating that is important. But we were having this conversation. He was like, yeah, I want to do this like vulnerability minute every day, like on social media. And I'm going to do it at 10 o'clock every day. And I was like, how do you know you're going to be vulnerable at 10 o'clock every day? Right? Because you can't, right? Like that's not the thing.
Down. I'm going to be vulnerable.
Yeah, right. That's not how vulnerability works. So then you're faking it. And then is it really vulnerability? So I think the overarching thing to me is that being vulnerable is, like in Alex's example, that's a great time to practice being vulnerable, to share things. Sometimes there's things you'll want to share. I did this post once with my like head down on the desk because I was having a really rough day. And people loved it, right? But I don't, for those of you who follow my content, I don't post content like that every day, right? That was real because it was real that day. And that's also what makes it vulnerable. So I think it's that coming back to like, what is authentic for you? And is vulnerability part of your authentic expression? Good, but it's not your full authentic expression.
I don't think it's about vulnerability per se. I think it's about being solely focused on one topic, whether that's vulnerability or your brochureware or somewhere in between. An instrument that only plays one note is hard to sing along with.
What a lovely way of phrasing that. An instrument that plays one note is hard to sing along with. Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, my point was not an anti-Stephen Bartlett post, but increasingly his content, which could be hugely valuable, is an incredibly inspirational, can be an incredibly inspirational person. But a lot of what he shares is stuff which is about being vulnerable, removing toxicity from your environment. And actually, I think that lots of that in an ideal world and in moderation is good. But actually, we can't all be in a perfect place all of the time. But in contrast to that, which was quite a miserable post, Tim had a really upbeat post, didn't you, Tim?
Hey,
Yes.
Before we move on to that, can we look at Mac's comment about disagreeing with the expert-only advice sentiment?
By all means, by all means.
Because I think there is expert advice, and then I think there's being human. And like, I have knowledge about relationships because I have been in good relationships. I have been in bad relationships. I don't know, like, in relationships, who knows all the things? In being a human, who knows all the things? But when you share something that another person has experienced, there's a connection point. And so I think there's opportunities for connection points in content that aren't related to being an expert. But when you're trying to find help, like if I was trying to find a relationship coach, then yeah, I would want them to be coaching with some knowledge. And I probably wouldn't want, but like, even for me, right? When you said Ferrari, I'm like, I don't know that I want a business coach with a Ferrari. Mercedes, maybe, but like Ferrari is a little too showy for me. And I feel like my personal brand is not showy. So I think there's, again, a balance between like, this is what I know. Rob said a couple of weeks ago in one of the digital downloads, it's not what you know or who you know, it's who knows what you know, right? And there's a lot of reasons why someone would choose you as a coach or service provider that is personal, and it's based on your personal expertise instead of professional expertise.
Yeah, well, I think Mac's comment is really on point. It's simultaneously bullseye and completely missing the target as far as I'm concerned. Because yes, using an example that helps to illustrate a point, that helps move somebody forward, is exactly what you're trying to do. The problem is that that's based on the supposition that all advice that you see on LinkedIn, let's say, is good advice. And that's the point. You know, the point is that advice is 10 a penny. You know, we absolutely know and have data to support that if you behave this way in social, this will be the way that you get traction. And we see loads of posts from people that say, yeah, the answer is employee advocacy. You just flip the company post onto your timeline and it gives you a constant stream of content which will engage your audience. No, it won't. We know it doesn't work at all. And we know that. And we see organizations that try that fail. And the problem is that if your best barometer, I believe, your best barometer for telling whether or not advice is good advice or not is to see whether the person that's giving the advice is following the advice, and seeing whether the advice that they're following, if they are following their own advice, is in fact begetting the results that they want. Hence my point about
Jensen.
I was just gonna say about on Robert's point where he said, would you want a relationship coach that has been happily married for 30 years or someone who has been divorced 6 times?
Yeah. Well, that's a brilliant comment, because if I'm going through a divorce, someone that's never had an argument is not somebody that I would want to be coaching me. But equally, if I want somebody to get my marriage back on track, clearly the person that's only ever got experience of getting divorced is probably not the person to help me either. So perhaps there is some common ground here, some middle bit.
Yeah, and I think again at some point there's like, I think what Mac's comment was related to like if I say something based on my experience about relationships, and Mac hears that and says like, oh, I really resonate with that. That's something I want to try. You can try it, right? That's fine. But I think there's a difference then between like drinking your own Kool-Aid and just giving advice, right? So like if I say something like this is, I say this a lot, like quite honestly, I've been divorced. I don't know if people want to come to me for advice, but I'm also happily married now. So I think I know some things, right? I know some things that don't work and I know some things that do work. But I say quite often, right? Like, I think the reason why my relationship with Carter is so productive is because we were ourselves from the very get-go, right? We weren't trying to be somebody else. And if I give that advice, I don't give that advice as a relationship coach. I give that advice from personal experience. I give business advice, sales and marketing advice from professional experience. And so if you're looking for professional help, I'm on the exact same page as you, Adam. You need to get it from people who are drinking their own Kool-Aid and have seen results, have data, right? All of those things. If you're taking be vulnerable advice from somebody who posts lots of things about being vulnerable, but never actually is vulnerable in a content share, then are you just sharing generic advice? And then at that point, meh.
I wanted to jump in there. So you said if they're drinking their own Kool-Aid. Now I've got, I like training, right? So.
And I was going to say, I'm sure you don't drink Kool-Aid, Jensen. It has too much sugar in it.
If you're drinking your own protein,
own protein shake.
Yeah. So if people would like to get slim, right? It's one thing that's kind of baffled me, kind of with every gym that I walk into. Now, if someone would like to lose weight and get fit, is every personal trainer you see in shape and fit themselves? Because not everyone does follow their own advice, but they do give amazing advice. So where do you sit with that? Is it, how do you judge if someone's advice is amazing advice if they don't drink their own Kool-Aid?
So there's an old adage in teaching: those who can do, those who can't teach. And it just cuts me to the core, because I believe that I can do and do very well, but my passion is teaching. So yeah, I mean, I once had a personal trainer who would take a smoke break in the middle of training me. Not exactly an endorsement there.
Well, and I think that there's an important piece too here about I'm trying to figure out if I agree that it's extrapolatable to the business scenario, but from a personal training scenario, right? You can know all the things to say and do that will help someone else do it because it's important to that someone else. And if it's not important to you, then you won't do it. Right? Rob teaches because teaching and sharing his knowledge is important to him, is meaningful to him, right? But some people might have all of the knowledge to be, I mean, I have all of the knowledge to personal train someone who is postpartum, right? I have the training, I have the certification. I could do that, but it's not meaningful to me. So I don't, right? And so I think we've talked about this. We talked about this in the family business episode, I think, is when like things are meaningful to you, it feels easy to do them, right? And when you do them as a job, then it feels easier to do that. And it's the same thing with content. When it's something that you deeply know and it's something that feels meaningful for you to share, then it's easy, to do that. But I also think this is the reason why a lot of people have trouble with content, is they think they need to, okay, my narrative now is about vulnerability. So I need to share all these facts about vulnerability. So then I hit Google and find out a whole bunch of facts and then just regurgitate them on my social media. And it feels like a lot of work because you're not actually interested in that. Right? Like, so I think there's,
good point.
Just like I started.
That's what GPT is for.
Right. Yes. The human experience is complex.
Is that where you don't work out the GPT?
That GPT could probably give you a great workout plan. Yeah. I want to lose this much weight and have this much percentage of muscle in my body, and I currently weigh this. What's my workout plan?
Yeah. But I do think further to that point that one of either Rob or Tracy said about, or maybe it was Jensen said about the fitness coach that's able to give you that good advice. They're allowed to be fat. You see, I don't think they are, and the reason that I don't think they are is that it's not just about knowing the advice; it's about implementing the advice. And if you can't implement your own advice, then it says there's something wrong in the overall picture there. Either the facts may be right, but the way that the facts are framed or presented means that it's not compelling enough to get a different action. And if you can't get that different action, what chance have you got of being able to pass that different action on to somebody else? And what we know, particularly in our field, is that telling somebody what they need to do is easy. Getting somebody to do something is difficult. And that's where the win lies. You know, there's nobody in the world, I believe, these days that's on social media that doesn't understand what they need to do to be successful on social media. They know they need a big network. They know they need to engage with people. They know they need to have a strong personal brand. They know they need to post every day. They know all this stuff, but they don't do it.
Yeah. So I do agree. But the there's, you know, if I think about sport, and maybe this is the difference between a trainer and a coach, right? A coach is there to extract more, help you extract more performance. And maybe it's, is it Ivan Lendl that coaches Djokovic? And Djokovic is a better tennis player than him. I may have got that wrong, but there's a situation in tennis, I think, where there's Djokovic is coached by someone that hasn't been as good as him, yet he's still coaching him. So
I think that's true of everybody in tennis, isn't it? Everyone that's at the top, their coach is not as good as they are, or they've never been as good as they are.
I would tell my sales trainees.
Sorry?
What was that, Tim?
I said, who's going next with the content? Because the first piece is taking us 28 minutes.
Let's cue yours up.
Yeah.
Do you do mine?
Yeah.
Why not?
So this is the first camera I ever had.
What is
my
it?
Grandfather's. It's a Kodak something Pronto 500 LK. It's a 35mm camera. And my father, you may or may not know, worked for the BBC, and I was about this tall, and he had a friend round who was a cameraman, and the cameraman said, "Oh, you've got a camera, that's great," and he gave me some advice, and he said, and Robert Matson's going to love this, he said, "Always tell a story." So whenever you take photos with a camera, what you're doing, even though when you're using a film and you've only got like 32 or 36, you need to be actually telling a story. And so my content, if you can.
Which one, Tim? You had. Oh, there it is.
It's there. Yeah. So my content here is from Wendy Muirhead. And what she actually does is they're going to a president's circle. So this is one of a story that she tells. So this is arriving, and they're arriving, and there's the sunset, and then there's the next post is what they're doing, and then the next post is something else. So I often say to people, you know, there's a battle going on, which is we've all got mobile phones, and as we go scroll through LinkedIn, we go boring, 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 boring. That's interesting. And in the battle to be that's interesting, because old brands tell me that's what they try and be. This is where what we're seeing is someone actually showing something about themselves, but also telling a story about themselves at the same time. And that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight, that this isn't, Tracy said this earlier on, about it's not about coming to here and posting. It's coming and here and telling a story. And part of the story is, as we know, that actually social media isn't coming and posting because it's about conversations. And by telling this story, what she's doing is she's opening her up to have a conversation.
Very good.
Fantastic.
Very good.
I think to follow on from that, I think that one of the challenges is for most people that are trying to develop the skills to post regularly is actually turning a post or a point they want to make into a compelling story. Because, you know, we have our own, and certainly this is one of the things that I've learned as I've traveled through my life, is that I have my own frame of reference for everything. The combination of things I know, places I've been, people I know, experiences I've had, gives me a unique perspective on things, and everybody's in exactly the same boat. So loads of things that I assume are just, well, everybody knows that, obviously. That's a ludicrous assumption to make. And the problem with telling your story is that often many of the gems that you have, many of the things that give that story context, you don't believe are valuable because you think, well, it's obvious, everybody knows that. And I think that reshaping how you position your concept, your idea, your thinking in front of somebody so that it does make sense, so that it does have a story, so that I'm not assuming any knowledge or position on this in you, the reader. I'm simply laying it out in such a way that you can walk that journey to get to the point where that photo makes sense, I think is absolutely the challenge for everybody that wants to create content.
Well, and I think there's also a difference between telling a story and telling your story. Right? Like you said, Adam, there's your version of that story. And everyone else who's attending the event with Wendy has their own version of the story, right? And so when we can tell our version of the story and give ourselves permission to have it based on what we know, what we've experienced, and that's actually why it's meaningful, and share it from that perspective. Because I also think people think I should share a story, right? I should tell a story. And then they go and they Google a template for storytelling. And then they plug things into the template and then think it's a story. And it is a story, but it's not your story. So now there's this, like, if I look at, I really did like that image from the last post about, like, you can create big steps between you and people, or you can create smaller steps between you and people that are easier for them to climb. And if you tell your story, then it will resonate with the people who get your story, right? I could tell, if I tell a story about pregnancy loss, it's probably not going to resonate with a bunch of people who have never experienced that. And that's fine, because that's not why I'm telling the story. I'm telling the story to resonate with people who have experienced that same thing, right? So even in Wendy's image, right, it might seem simple, but for me, I love the like tricky light in photos, right? Where you get like a light phenomenon and you're like, oh, how did that even happen, right? So that's attractive to me. And then I'll read the post. Is that attractive to everyone? No, but it works because it resonates with her, and she shares it because it resonates with her, and it resonates with certain people because they're similar type of people, not just because it's a story.
Yeah, or they're interested in you. They want to learn about you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a brilliant comment from Robert.
People can be taught the skills of storytelling, but if the story doesn't interest the teller, it likely won't interest the audience.
And I think that is a mic drop moment, because actually so often when we engage with somebody that is pitching a product or service to us, clearly they're not interested in the story, really. They've learnt something parrot fashion off a sheet, and they're regurgitating that to the audience because it's best practice, or it's got those key drivers, or it's, you know, this is exactly how we need to position this in line with our brand story. And actually it's completely devoid of their passion or their interest or those things that get them excited about it. And if you're not excited about your story, well, why the hell would I be?
I love storytelling, and humble brag, I think I'm pretty good at it. Where I struggle, so this is me being vulnerable, I struggle turning the story into a conversation. I don't want to talk at people, I want to talk with people, but my stories have not yet gotten to the point where they invite somebody in to contribute. So that's something that, to me at least, seems the next level of storytelling. How do you do that? How do you turn a story into a conversation?
I think one of the things I'd just like to add to that, Rob, that is an additional challenge on social media is there are so many people who are just lurkers, right? Who are actually resonating with your story and it's meaningful to them, but they don't comment or they don't share or they don't like or they don't anything. So you can't know that. So I think while there is a practice of moving people into a conversation, it's also important to realize that if we're sharing a story for engagement, then like what's our intention with the story? Because if I'm a storyteller and I want to tell this story because it's meaningful to me and it could be meaningful to other people, then I always say to myself, like, if I get one like or one comment, or sometimes even just because I put this out there and I get views on it, like I've done my job because this could be helping people. But so I just wanted to put that out there because it's not just about moving it to the conversation, right? So now we can talk about moving it to the conversation, but also there is a contribution that you make by just sharing the story. Tim, you were going to say something, I think, about moving it into conversation.
I'm like, who's the next content?
I think we have Alex next. Alex, you're good to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Ooh. Preach, Alex.
It's out a level.
Ooh.
So, does anyone know Yakko from Winning by Design?
I met him at a conference.
Yeah, I've never met him, but he is a great guy.
I've got a book of his somewhere, about over there.
Okay. So, does anyone want to have a go at pronouncing his name?
Jacco van der.
Yeah, it's Jacco van der Kooi. So on LinkedIn, you can actually click the sound button and he pronounces his name. Very, very, very cool. I guess so. What I wanted to do was spend a minute talking about this post that he did recently, I think yesterday or early this morning, that talks about the decline in close rates within an SMB and enterprise, kind of spanning SMB to enterprise, business to business sales. And I guess in the spirit of storytelling, because he's done some analysis here, and he's basically found that in the last 2 years, close rates have dropped from between kind of 23 to 36-ish% down to 17%. So, you know, like almost a 50% drop in close rates in the last couple of years. And that kind of brings all sorts of thoughts to mind in terms of, well, we've had all these layoffs in tech. You know, we've got this growing problem within our industry that is quite catastrophic, really, when you think about how many people have been affected. But if I kind of cast my mind back 13 years, I think it was Brent Adamson and Matt Dixon that highlighted initially through a load of researching, you know, business to business, you know, buyers, that the buyers were kind of taking their purchase decision of software and solutions almost 60% of the way through the purchase process before they reach out to a supplier. And if you fast forward to today, tongue twister, it's closer to 90%. So this problem has been happening for years. It's not brand new, yet it feels like we're in the eye of a storm right now, and it's only going to get worse. And so it kind of talks to some of the things we've touched on today, and you were talking about earlier, Adam, in terms of being more authentic, being ourselves on social. And I think we've lost track of the importance of that and using that as a way to build relationships. And we have a situation now whereby salespeople have been selling to buyers for so many years. We kind of created our own problem for ourselves as sellers, because buyers don't want to be sold to, therefore they're not buying. Couple that with the economic crisis, decisions aren't actually being kind of made, purchase decisions aren't being made, and we find ourselves in this situation. Businesses are struggling.
Yeah, I think that there's an overarching business issue here. So when you first got into Martech and software sales, Alex, you know the Martech chart that's got all of the little logos on it?
Yeah, Scott Brinkers.
How many logos were there on the chart when you went into this industry?
Yeah, a handful. I don't think it existed when I first got into the industry.
So, and how many are there today?
10,000.
10,000. Yeah,
more.
Right,
okay.
Actually. Yeah.
So let's assume 10 years ago there were 4,000, and today there are 10,000. Now the economy has grown, the number of businesses has grown, but the number of businesses hasn't grown by 2.5-fold. The number of businesses might have increased by 50%. So if the number of businesses that there are in existence has increased by 50%, the number of buyers has increased by 50%, but the number of businesses selling into that has almost tripled, hence the fact we've got this situation. So I don't believe that the problem is that close rates are going down. I believe the problem is that there are more people fighting over effectively only slightly more stuff that they can go after, deals that they can go after. So it becomes increasingly, I agree about the 90% of the way through the buying journey, but I think that the issue here is that it is contingent on you to look better than other people. And that's the key thing. That's always the key thing, isn't it? Buyers are just normal people. If you go into two restaurants side by side, one of them looks really nice, one of them looks really horrible. Which one are you going to go to? You're going to go to the one that looks nice. You're not a food critic. You don't know. Actually, you don't know until you've eaten in both restaurants. However, you're jumping to a conclusion. So we need to make ourselves the attractive looking restaurant. Yeah. And that's the key, isn't it? That's where people are getting it wrong. And the fact that there's now an average 17.5% close rate actually doesn't matter, as long as you're getting 100% close rate. And it's the other people's problem then. And I do think that this is simultaneously a problem and an opportunity.
Yeah, agreed. And I do think, you're right. Obviously, it's about making ourselves look as attractive as possible, so our potential customers walk towards us. But there is this, and Jacco kind of references it in his post, Matt Dixon's Jolt effect. 50% of deals are kind of stalling to the status quo, right? The decisions aren't being made, even if that organization looked the most attractive to get it, to get on the short list. But it's kind of falling down as that purchase decision kind of goes around other stakeholders for support. And I guess part of that again is looking, making sure you look most attractive, most credible to those stakeholders. But I also think it's about helping an organization quantify the commercial value of the solving the problem. that they need to solve, which I think most vendors struggle to do.
Can I throw something else in here? Because I'm wondering what everybody thinks about, because over the last 10 years, there's been progressively more and more automation in the sales and marketing processes, which is theoretically taking people farther away from people. Is that a contributor to decreasing close rates?
Well, along those same lines, that automation allows more to go into the pipeline. Right. I'm reminded of what my accounting professor once taught us about ratios or percentages. The problem with ratios is that they're made up of two numbers, either of which can be manipulated to get the result that you want. So if we're putting in too many opportunities that really aren't opportunities, but we're measured on pipeline as much as we're measured on close, well, then we're going to fill the pipeline with opportunities that really aren't opportunities.
Right. Like if you're a quote unquote sales rep and you count every one of those in-mail messages that people delete as your like starting number, right? Then of course the close ratio is going to be lower because those aren't strategic. They're not targeted. So that would create a lower close number.
And at any point in that funnel, as you're qualifying out, if you're qualifying out less because you need that pipeline to display that you're doing your job, then you're getting bogus data.
And I think that there's an interesting thing to then be reviewed is like, what are my sales KPIs, right? Because I know like I've come from organizations where the KPI was 125 calls a week and closed business, right? But nobody was looking at what was happening in between. Was that we were actually bonusing people on making their 125 calls a week. But when they were doing that, we weren't closing any deals. So now we're incentivizing them to follow a protocol that doesn't end up with us making money. And so I think this is an important thing to investigate and not just say like, oh, global close rates are down, my close rates are down. I guess that's just how it is. I mean, this is an opportunity for you to look at your organization and see like, am I like, what am I encouraging people to do? Is that actually helpful? Could we as an organization still have a 34% close rate, even though the industry has 17, right? How can we? So I think it's an important thing to use the data as an investigatory opportunity instead of just saying, oh, global close rates are down. That must make like mine are down too. I guess I'm just the same as everybody else, so there's nothing for me to.
No, you've nailed it there. That you use the data, the leading data, as a barometer for whether people are doing things that are going to get you hope to the end thing. So it's like you're one of my salespeople. The two things that I'm going to measure you on are the number of hours you spend in the office and the amount of stuff you sell. Well, no, you can't have it both ways. You're either paying for my time or you're paying for my output. So if I close $1 million deal on day 1 of January, well, I can take the rest of the year off because I've met my target. If you want me in the office 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, well, I'll come in and I'll shuffle papers and play solitaire on my PC. Because actually, you can't ask people for both. You can only ask them for the important metric. The important metric is you need to sell this much stuff. Okay, so the other stuff is an indicator that, okay, the reason that you're not selling enough stuff is you haven't got enough stuff in pipeline. The reason you haven't got enough stuff in pipeline is because you're not doing enough of this, this, and this. And that's the bit that we need to help you with. But at the end of the day, it's all about the number, isn't it?
I think Robert Mattson's comment really sums that up. People often think a process is good and measure metrics based on that process, but then never question the process or the preconceptions.
Yeah.
And I think that's just because it's easy. It's easy to like define a process and then follow the process, right? But at the end of the day, our job is to make money. And if we're doing a bunch of things, this is why I don't like the 8-hour workday thing either, because like, if your concept is I'm going to pay people to sit in the office and do things for 8 hours a day, okay, but isn't the goal at the end of the day to like sell things? Even if you're one of those businesses that's like, we just want to impact people. Okay, well, you're not going to impact anybody by just like shuffling papers around for 8 hours a day, right?
Our accountant and chairman says the problem with most businesses is that they confuse fixed and variables. So people, their starting point is the fixed thing is that you're going to work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Actually, what you should be saying is the fixed thing is the output, what you want to get, the sale. And then the variable thing, because, you know, if you start with you're going to work 8 hours a day, sell as much as you can, that's the variable. Here's how much you need to sell. You have to do whatever it takes to get that output.
Yeah.
And when you put it that way around, you not only get surety of what the output is, but you potentially, if you become very efficient at doing stuff, you have to work a lot less hard to get there. Yeah,
absolutely. And just to confirm, if we're going to say I'm super anything, I'm actually a super socialist. So let's be clear. Although I do believe in making money, right? Like businesses need to make money to pay the people. This is why we have all of these layoffs right now, right? And we're just saying, okay, we're not going to review. I wrote a different article about that. We're not going to review our sales and marketing efforts and spend. We're just going to lay off a bunch of people and hope that something different happens. Like this, hopium, not a thing.
Whose content's this?
This is mine.
8 minutes to go.
Okay, we could go deep on this probably, mostly because I'm super opinionated, which is why I wrote an article about it. But I got an email earlier this week, Forbes email, and I signed up for Forbes email because I feel like they're reputable business information, although I've debunked a whole bunch of things that they've written. But they sent out a newsletter earlier this week talking about Typeform and their $65 million investment, right? So $65 million between like Lightspeed Ventures and Google and Microsoft and all these things going into this generative AI. And so I was like, okay, there's so much generative AI, right? Like I need to learn more about this. And so I was reading it, and what I learned was that how it works is it takes your current brand input and then uses its intelligence to generate new brand output that is in alignment with the brand input you give it. So the number one thing that stood out for me.
What could go wrong, Tracy?
Right. This concept of garbage in, garbage out. Right. So like two big things that came up for me were just like, so I'm a branding specialist, right? What I know is that most people don't have clarity on their brand. If you're generating right now a whole bunch of content that is brochureware, even like white papers and things like that, this is just stuff. So now we're going to take stuff, we're going to output more stuff, even though that original stuff didn't create any engagement either. But now we're going to have the AI create the stuff that doesn't create any engagement. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that to the table because it made me like really furious because our problem isn't more content. I guess at the end of the day, this is the thing for me, right? If the problem was that you had amazing content and it created amazing engagement and you needed to create more of it, then this would it would help you do that. The problem is that most people think their problem is more content. If I could just generate more content faster, then I would have more eyeballs. But that's not a thing.
Tracy, I think one of the things that I hear a lot is people say, if only someone read our brochure, they would find out how brilliant we were.
So
and that's what we need more content, because if people only just read how great we are as a company, they'd buy.
Right. And so if people aren't reading it right now, what makes you think people are going to read more of it?
They're not.
Tracy,
Exactly.
your article reminded me of two things. both of them related to Walt Disney. One of them, my class is in the middle of a case presentation on the Disney company. And one of the teams ultimately came up with the problem Disney is facing right now is lack of creativity. They are taking all of their old titles and just rehashing them. So the Lion King animated movie is now the Lion King live action movie, and so on. And I press them on this. I think they're onto something, but that's my job as the professor, is to really challenge them. I said, so what is the big problem with this? Well, eventually, if all you're doing is rehashing what you've always done, you're going to run out of stuff. And that reminded me of the quote from Walt Disney. When he was first doing animation, before he did any motion pictures, he had a series of silly symphonies. And one that was incredibly successful was The Three Little Pigs. So his publishers or whomever came to him and said, we want more pigs, give us more pigs. And Walt's famous quote is, you can't top pigs with pigs. And that always sticks with me. Yeah, you've always got to be iterating. You've got to be doing the next thing. And ChatGPT and all of these AI, they're not iterating. They are repackaging what's already been put out there. They're doing it incredibly well. They're doing it incredibly quickly, but they're not doing it incredibly new.
Mm-hmm. And there's like an evolutionary part of business that gets missed then, right? Like we're in a place where all these people are doing layoffs. Companies are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They are moving towards going out of business. And that is a crux for evolution. Doing the same thing is not going to change your trajectory. You need to do something different. And so doing the same thing faster isn't going to fix your problem. And then my biggest concern is that when people see, all of these big players, they've made $65 million worth of investment in this business. It's got to be the next big thing. This is going to solve my problem. Again, we get lazy and don't ask ourselves, what is our problem? If my problem is that my current marketing content isn't generating any engagement, having more of that doesn't fix my problem.
Yeah. Can we go to Alfie's question, please?
Alfie asks, can I ask your guys' thoughts on call stats being used in an office to motivate the sales team?
Ooh.
I worked in a call center for a decade, and they even had one measure that was called every breath you take. And my pushback to them was, simply because you can measure something doesn't mean you should. I cannot act on every metric out there. And does it motivate me? Hell no. In fact, often it was demotivating. I even remember the average call time was supposed to be 2 minutes, 38 seconds. Well, when you take these metrics and you don't explain to the team very well what they are for or the why behind it, something is going to go awry. We had one sales rep, no bit of a lie, would be in the middle of a call, in the middle of a sales presentation, and hang up. I'm sorry, my calls have to be 2 minutes, 38 seconds, and we're at 2 minutes, 35. Boom. No sale was made, but she hit her number.
But also, on the flip side, I've worked in a call center, and I got in trouble because my average call time was too long. Right, so I'm kind of chatty. Yeah, shocking, right?
I should be too good with the customer.
I don't know. I worked there for like 2.5 shifts. It was not for me, but like I wanted to have a conversation with people, and then I got in trouble. I actually had a really high close rate, and I got in trouble for it because my conversation was too long. And I was like, this is not the right place for me.
This reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday. Someone was telling me, and I don't know if this is true. I need to ask Google or maybe ChatGPT. But Cambridge University start every lecture 5 past the hour. Do you know why? Any ideas why that might be? Because
Conference.
apparently years ago there was a 5-minute delay. You know, now we're kind of maritime and, you know, everything's aligned to the second. But apparently it's still done today because of that fact. That was a fact then and it was an issue then, but today it's no longer an issue. When you were talking, Rob, it's like, who is cold calling today and why are they calling?
Why? Yeah.
Well, and I think so. I just want to look at it too, because I think there are some stats associated with calls that are helpful. Like how many second calls do you have, right? How many people are in a conversation? How many people want to learn more, right? I think so one of the things that I thought was always the most meaningful when I was managing a sales team was how many calls did you get, right? Like people are doing cold calls. How many meetings did you book off of that, right? So I had this one salesman who would do 125 calls a week because that was the number they were supposed to hit. And literally they got bonused for hitting that number and booked no meetings ever, right? And I was like, how do you want to make money? Here's capitalist Tracy coming back. How do you want to make money at this organization? Through commission, right? Like he made a small base salary, but his money came from commissions. I'm like, so you want to sell something, right? You don't want just $50 keg gift cards to like every time you hit your 125 calls. And it was, yeah, they're like, I want to make more money. So I asked him, how do you think you can get meetings? Like, well, I want to do the research and I want to have time to like focus on what I would say to a prospect and all these things. And I'm like, okay, for 1 week, let's try that, right? You do it your way. I'll defend the fact that you're not going to hit 125 to the management team. I'm fine with that because I'm giving you permission. So let's see what happens. That week he did 8 calls and booked 3 meetings. And so I was like super excited about that ratio. I don't know what Tim is trying to say.
Jensen, over to you.
Perfect. So I've got 2 quotes to close the show on that I heard, and I thought it goes well with kind of life and just jobs and work really. The first one is rejection is the chisel for perfection, which I thought was quite interesting. And then the next one is no means next opportunity.
There you go. Awesome.
Nice.
Very good.
Nice.
Who's closing us out? Rob?
Sure. So again, fabulous conversations taking place in the comments. Thank you everyone for participating in that. It has been another great session. Of course, we're long-winded. We're running long. So I want to thank everyone on the panel as well. And look forward to seeing everyone again right here next week. Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye, guys.